Now, for more on these escalating tensions, we're being joined now by the U.S. author, journalist, and blogger Max Blumenthal. He is a senior editor at The Real News and is the author of best-selling books Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party, and Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. Max, as someone who has written a great deal about Syria, what do you make of these latest accusations against the Syrian government for using chemical weapons?
Thanks for having me on. The Syrian government was taking back key areas from foreign-backed jihadist groups. In this case, the Army of Islam. It had taken East Ghouta, and it was on the verge of, or had taken, an area to its south called Douma. And every time that we see the Syrian army, the Syrian government advancing and liberating these major areas from insurgent groups backed by foreign powers, there is an allegation of chemical weapons use. We recently saw it last year, about a year ago, in Khan Sheikhoun in Al-Qaeda-occupied Idlib, and now we see it again in Douma by the Army of Islam. No evidence was provided except for photographs disseminated by the US, UK, and Qatari-backed group, the White Helmets. We also saw the Syrian American Medical Society make a claim of chemical weapons use. This is another group backed by the United States. These are not credible sources. These are groups that work hand in glove with jihadists inside Syria. And on the basis of those claims, we are on the verge of war. We stand on the verge of another disastrous regime change war that could potentially throw another country into chaos.
Now, Max, the talk of Trump and his team is one of a military response to this alleged attack, and it's certainly being echoed by the more hawkish media outlets. What kind of action do you think we're going to see from the U.S. and its allies?
Well, actually, we see no dissent within mainstream American media on this issue. American media appears to be far less diverse and free than media in countries like Russia or Venezuela, which are routinely demonized in the U.S. And so the American public has not sufficiently mobilized against an attack on Syria, and an attack would be absolutely disastrous. However, it's not clear what Trump is willing to do. We saw Trump in the 2016 campaign raise his own questions about the nature of the Syrian rebels and accurately call them jihadists. He's now under enormous pressure from neoconservatives. His national security director, John Bolton, has never met a war he doesn't like. And so we could be seeing any moment cruise missile strikes on Syria. We also have to be mindful of what's happening in back channel talks with Moscow, which has extremely invested itself in the stability of Syria and in preventing another Iraq or Libya-style situation.
Now, Max, we want to turn a little bit to U.S.-Russia relations as it relates to the Syria incident. We have seen political and military mobilization against Syria, one of Russia's key allies in the Middle East, which follows on from the accusations against Russia over the Skripal poisoning case in Britain, which the U.S. was very vocal about. Do you think that Russia is the real target here?
Absolutely. I mean, this incident is taking place against the backdrop of Russiagate, which is a manufactured scandal that has failed to prove collusion between the Trump 2016 presidential campaign and the Russian government. The Skripal case was clearly aimed at Russia, and that has fallen apart too. And even mainstream sources in the UK are forced to admit that they can no longer clearly point the finger at Moscow. And so we see another incident aimed at Russia, which is the key guarantor of Syria's stability. And these various other incidences should cause us to call into question the claims by Syrian insurgent groups about a chemical attack. In this case, though, we are going to probably see an OPCW, Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, investigation on the ground. Because the Syrian army and the Syrian government have retaken Douma, they can guarantee the safety of those investigators. There has been no investigation from the ground on the alleged chemical attack that took place a year ago in Al-Qaeda-controlled Idlib, which triggered U.S. military action. And so I think, the public really needs to start asking questions, because all of the claims, the key substantial claims in Russiagate, in the Skripal case, have fallen apart. And I think if we could see a real investigation on the ground in Syria, I think a lot of those who are issuing skepticism will be vindicated.
Now, Max, you've written a lot about the blowback from the invasion of Iraq. Iraq, what do you think would be the blowback from the potential toppling of the Assad regime?
Well, we saw in Libya, for example, the taking of large areas of territory by ISIS in Sirte, which was Gaddafi's former hometown. We saw Al-Qaeda take over, basically overtake the security services in Tripoli and Benghazi for a time, open-air slave auctions. Syria would be far more catastrophic if there were an Iraq-style intervention that removed the Syrian government and all of its institutions. And the only groups that would stand to gain would be jihadist groups like the Army of Islam and the Al-Qaeda affiliate that controls Idlib. That's a terrifying scenario, and it should terrify everyone across the region. We would also see possibly the destabilization of Lebanon as well.
Thank you so much, Max Blumenthal, for your insight on this particular issue. We've been talking to Max Blumenthal. He's the senior editor at The Real News about the escalating situation in Syria and possible increasing military action from the U.S.